Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Charles Aldous to the program. He is a Young Voices contributor in the UK. And Charles, take a moment. For those who are meeting you for the very first time, tell us just a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Hello, so I'm Charles, and I'm an economic historian at Cambridge University. I'm reading for their MPhil, which is like a master's here in philosophy, and I'm interested in a lot of different things, whether that's politics, economics, finance, business, even football. You guys call it soccer. We don't. And so a hell of a lot of things. But today I think we're discussing energy, which is a big issue, on both sides of the pond. I think America is, despite the partisan differences, doing a hell of a lot better than Britain is, or has been doing.
My understanding is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that I've talked to a number of UK contributors, particularly during the colder months, and they have indicated that energy is incredibly expensive in the UK. Is that still the case? Are you paying a lot for electricity?
Yeah. That's correct, Brian. And as the American ambassador, Warren Stevens, said in a recent interview at the Times, it's about 3 to 4 times more expensive than
goodness.
the UK. So that's for your gas, what we call petrol, diesel, just you're literally turning on the light. So that has effectively meant that we have no industry in Britain. Essentially, it's too expensive. And, a whole host of other issues companies can't set up. And then compounding this problem is that we are shifting to renewables, which is not a bad idea, but we are not A, drilling, we're not B, fracking, and C, we're not storing any or enough of the renewables yet. So we've got an idea, it's sort of zealotry. We want to be renewables, but we've not got the storage yet.
Yeah, I'm looking at an article you wrote for 1828.org.uk about if you want to fix Britain's battery blunder, look to America. You talk about the use of green energy, particularly wind turbines off of the offshore of Scotland. And there's times where they're not producing any energy at all, not because they can't, but because there's nowhere to store it.
And then they're paid $80 million a year not to produce energy, to turn off the turbines. And then, but the issue's bigger than that as well. There are issues with the grid. So the grid actually isn't big enough and fast enough to transmit all this energy. And nor is it big enough to currently have all the battery storage installed in the UK, which means that the planning stops all of that because the grid can't permit it. So you're in a sort of situation where you've got baked in high energy costs until eventually the planning process allows it to feed through, and then the tech sort of gets better, and they start building these pylons which connect the energy to the cities where they need to go. Because like you said, we are from Idaho, rural Idaho is going to blue California, the big cities.
Yep.
Well, that's similar in England. I'm sitting in southern England in Cambridge. But most of the energy in Cambridge will probably be coming from Scotland or some of the rural solar farms in East Anglia.
So let's put some numbers to this, just so people can understand. The challenge ahead of Britain right now is they need, what did you write, 23 to 27 gigawatts of capability to store, I guess we call them battery energy storage systems, or BESS. They need 23 to 27 gigawatts. How much do they currently have at this point in terms of storage?
Well, they've only got 6.5-ish, and they've got about 7.6 under construction. So
wow.
It's not going to happen, is it? Unless radically it changes.
So what is it that what prevents the creation of more and more of those battery energy storage systems? Is it environmental studies that go into creating them? Is it just the cost of materials? I'm curious. That's a huge gap to have to make up. What is holding it back at this time?
So materials are obviously a bit cheaper in America because you're producing more of your own stuff because you got cheaper energy in the first place to actually produce it, which we don't have in Britain. The other big issues are really coming with the grid capacity just isn't there. It's currently based on a capacity where essentially you have gas, so in the UK, so gas is a lot more expensive, and so that sets the price. We don't have zonal pricing yet where if you have, for example, in rural Norfolk, there is an abundance of wind, that should mean that the energy prices are cheaper. But if one gas station is operating in the UK, the energy price for the whole of the UK, a country of 70 million people, is set just because of that one gas. So that massively inflates the price. And so I guess to answer your question, partly some of these big companies are quite happy because they've got a captive audience and 70 million people, we've got some gas going. So it's in their interest to delay the renewable projects as well as carry on with what they're doing. And then I think added to that, and we could talk about this for ages, is planning. Planning in the UK is a nightmare. My family are actually trying to get a solar extension through on their farm. So it's slightly separate to this, but solar needs battery storage. And so we've got currently 12 megawatts and we're wanting to get it up to 40 megawatts. But the local people, lots of them don't like it, despite there being a solar farm having existed there since 2012, despite it not being in an area of outstanding natural beauty. It's next door to a pig unit in a wet field in Suffolk. So it's not exactly, I don't know, the Grand Canyon. And, you're in southern England as well. So you need to have energy. And so I think the planning needs to be from a top. It needs to be at the top. Currently, we have effectively, it's probably quite shocking for an American. We got villages with about 100 people dictating planning policies.
Wow.
That is I think that's ridiculous. Like whether you're conservative, liberal, whatever, that's not good for a country on critical infrastructure.
So tell me, where are some of the areas where the U.S. is actually doing, an admirable job, or at least getting admirable results in terms of their energy storage?
So as I say in the article, Brian, it's surprisingly California and Texas, two states which many people would say have got nothing in common. But you look at what Schwarzenegger did. When he was the Republican governor, he signed it into law, which actually is requiring investor-owned utilities to meet their battery storage targets. So, Britain has not had that, but he's done that since he was governor, 2011, 2010, years ago. And so California has got majorly high levels of battery storage, and so has Texas. And I suppose you could say Texas is a very wealthy oil state, so it's quite easy to pump the money in. But it's clearly a bipartisan thing in America, whereas it's not so bipartisan in the UK, because now you've got the rise of the Reform Party, who, unlike people in Donald Trump's cabinet, you look at Rick Perry, the former governor of Texas, an energy secretary, who's made a lot of money now off an AI renewable energy company. In Britain, the right are more uncomfortable with renewable energy. So I could see it going back the other way. And then we'll have this sort of position where we have gas, and then we maybe open up North Sea oil again, and then we don't go enough and do enough with our renewables.
It sounds like incentives, the right kind of incentives, are what it will take to get some of those energy producers moving in the right direction. We have about a minute here. Tell me what needs to happen in Britain to turn the tide here.
So we've talked about planning, it needs to be completely streamlined. You also need to obviously give incentives to battery storage companies. We need to get to a zonal grid pricing system. We need to have energy pluralism as well, as Simon French talks about in the Times. We need to be less scared of having oil, gas, potentially fracking alongside wind. And that's what America's doing quite well. America probably do a bit better than us, but they're doing a lot better than us, and that's what we need to be following.
All right. Again, we are talking with Charles Aldous. He is a policy writer with Young Voices UK. And for those who wish to follow you or otherwise connect with you on social media, what's the best way to go about that?
You could add me on LinkedIn, which is literally Charles Aldous, or my Twitter, which is also Charles Aldous, ALDAUS.
Wonderful visiting with you. I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you very much.
Once again, we welcome you back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Thomas Irwin back to the show. Thomas, you've been on here before, but it's actually been a little while. Take a moment, introduce yourself to our audience, and tell us who you are.
Hi, Brian. Well, it's great to be back talking with you today. I'm Thomas Irwin. I live and work in Los Angeles. One of my goals is to see Los Angeles be a more abundant and vibrant city by building more housing. I work in the housing policy and advocacy space, and also just be a more effective city at delivering kind of core things that the city needs to deliver to its citizens.
So I'm looking at an article from the LA Times, and the title of this kind of threw me a little bit, talking about it's no wonder that Angelenos are painting the crosswalks themselves. Talk to me about that. I mean, a massive city that size, I'm sure keeping up with infrastructure is an ongoing challenge year round. But what prompted that particular headline?
Yeah, so I'm going to tell you just a little background about my friend Johnny. So Johnny is a law student actually at UCLA, and he lives on the west side of Los Angeles, which is generally the more affluent area. He lives next to a park, which is really nice. There's a lot of families with small children who walk from their apartment or home to the park. And what Johnny noticed was that at one particular intersection, there were a lot of close calls between these pedestrians, often, again, families, young children, moms pushing strollers, and cars, because while the intersection had a four-way stop, there were no crosswalks that were painted at this intersection. Now, in California law, any four-way stop, legally, there's a crosswalk. You as a driver are supposed to yield to the pedestrian. But we all know driving, we're often, in the modern age, distracted. And so without a visible crosswalk there, he was noticing a lot of cars weren't doing what they were supposed to do and yield. There's a famous California stop, right, at an intersection where the car doesn't actually stop, it just comes to a slow.
Yeah.
More common than you would think from someone who doesn't live here. And so what Johnny did is he actually gathered a group of friends and he said, we're going to study the code. We're going to find out how to do this correctly, and we're going to paint our own crosswalk. And he's not alone. There's actually a whole group in Los Angeles called the Crosswalk Collective. They go around different intersections painting crosswalks because the city is so bad at delivering infrastructure on time. There is a follow-up case that actually happened a few months after this where a young boy was killed at an intersection where the city had said it would paint a crosswalk about 10 years ago and has been dragging its feet on actually following through on that painting. And so Johnny didn't want that to happen in this intersection. So he did it himself with some friends, which is a kind of civic mindedness that I think we should be celebrating. Unfortunately, 3 days later, after this became a news story, a well kind of documented news story in Los Angeles, the city actually sent out a crew to take out the crosswalk. They actually had to dig out the road, dig out the paint, take it out, because they were so worried that someone who was not an official city actor had the audacity to paint their own crosswalk to try to make life better for their fellow citizens.
Oh my goodness. I mean, look, I believe in job security and everything, but that just rubs me the wrong way. I mean, the people acted in good faith to do something that the city was either unwilling or unable to do, and it just seems so petty to come in and want to remove it. So I have to ask, did it end with that?
Yeah, so I mean that's how I felt too, Brian. When I heard the story from my friends and when I saw the news coverage, it felt petty. And there were so many other people in Los Angeles who felt that way that within a week, the city sent another crew out to fix the work that they had done, to take out the crosswalk and paint a new crosswalk. Of course, all on, the public dime. I'm sure people got paid very well to take out the crosswalk and then paid very well to put in the crosswalk. Now, I think if you gave truth serum to the city bureaucrats who are in charge of this project, what they would tell you is they were worried about liability. If something goes wrong, we're a very litigious state here in California. They're worried about lawsuits. And this is a fair concern, right? We don't want people just doing anything in terms of infrastructure, right? There's a famous example a few years back where the former governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger, repaved his own pothole, right? I don't know that I would necessarily go so far as encouraging citizens to pave their own potholes, right? I'm sure that there's things that could go wrong. The problem is that if you actually look at the data, so the city controller in LA actually publishes data on lawsuits. The city pays out far more money every year in claims related to broken infrastructure versus things like disability law. So one of the liability issues is that, if you paint a crosswalk, if you're not putting in all of the necessary ADA compliant, make it easy for someone in a wheelchair to access that crosswalk, you might get sued by someone, a lawyer who's taking advantage of the situation. But actually the city doesn't have that problem. The problem the city has is it just has a lot of broken infrastructure and it's not fixing it, and it's facing lawsuits for that reason.
Well, I was just thinking, if we ever need to stimulate the economy, this may be the way to do it. The whole broken windows, theory. No, I'm impressed that there are citizens who care enough to go and to try to make a difference. But how do we roll back that irresistible urge for bureaucracy to assert itself, especially when something good has happened?
Yeah, I mean, and Brian, I just have to tell you, this is not an isolated incident. The city of Los Angeles has a habit of making promises that it can't keep. So our former mayor, Eric Garcetti, who served under the Biden administration as ambassador to India, he had 3 core initiatives as mayor, all of which failed to deliver on their promises. So one of them, obviously, we're hosting the Olympics in Los Angeles 2028. And so he identified 28 transit projects that he wanted to have finished by 2028. And I'm here to tell you that we have 5 of those original 28 that are finished, and it's 2025, and we probably won't get to 10 by 2028. He also had a vision called Vision Zero, where there would be 0 pedestrian deaths because of improving this pedestrian infrastructure that we're talking about with crosswalks and fixing sidewalks. And what happened under his mayorship is that pedestrian deaths actually went up. From 2015 to 2023, they went from about 190 pedestrian deaths to 340, right? So we went in the wrong direction. So the kind of core issue here is that there's this issue that scholars talk about called state capacity, right? And what this means is that there's certain issues which are political issues, right? We might disagree about the size of government, the size of the welfare state, even here in Los Angeles, housing policy, how much housing we should build. But there's certain questions that really aren't policy questions. They're just questions of the state doing the things that we all expect them to do. Educate our kids, repair our sidewalks, keep the roads safe, keep infrastructure safe for pedestrians. And in Los Angeles, we just have a fundamental problem. The bureaucracy doesn't do those things very well. And what I would propose to the city of Los Angeles is there's kind of 2 ways you can go with that. One is that you can simply take things that are currently under state control and you can say, outsource them to citizens. So the state of Oregon is actually doing this with a lot of pedestrian infrastructure. Their state DOT just released a PDF that any, we could call them crosswalk vigilante, can take and say, here's how to build your own crosswalk. Here's how to build your own curb ramp, right? Whatever needs you see in your neighborhood, you can just do it yourself, right? So that's one approach. I think that's a very valid approach. I would love for the city of Los Angeles to take that approach more. The other approach is to just actually have politicians who focus on, rather than proposing big, ambitious plans, they focus on the simple work of delivering the basic core infrastructure that a city is supposed to do. A lot of this is just streamlining processes so that rather than spending years, which is we're famous for in California, but a lot of states, it's not just California, spend years studying how to make the improvements instead of actually getting people out there to fix the streets, right? We need politicians who actually, they're not trying to go on cable news and make these hits or get, like our former mayor did, try to propose these ambitious things so he can rise in the ranks of politics nationally. We need people who actually are focused on these soup to nuts basic issues of governance in our cities.
Well, it sounds like a great learning opportunity has presented itself, not just for Los Angeles authorities, but also for people like your friend Johnny, who wants to get involved and are willing to get involved. So is there an organization? Is there a place people can turn if they want to basically combine their efforts here?
Totally. So, I mean, here in Los Angeles, I would recommend getting involved in the Crosswalk Collective or a group called Streets for All. They're very focused on these issues, specifically when it comes to, pedestrian infrastructure, transit, actually delivering projects on time, trying to fight traffic congestion and pedestrian deaths, things like that. I'd also recommend, there's a woman named Jennifer Palka who's a senior policy advisor at the Siena Center. She has a great book called Recoding America on the issue of state capacity. I would totally recommend that.
Again,
I'd also...
We're up against the clock here. We're talking with Thomas Irwin. He is a Young Voices contributor. Where can people find you on social media?
Totally. You can find me at my handle, Coach Thomas LA. You can also find me on Substack at Thomas Pontifications. You can read the article in the LA Times. I'd highly recommend people do that. And thanks for having me on today, Brian.
Welcome back. This is our final segment today of Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Gabriela Blanco back to the program. Gabby, it's been a little while since we've talked. For folks meeting you for the first time, take a moment, tell us about who you are and what you do.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm Gabby. I'm born and raised in Havana, Cuba. I now live in Austin, Texas, and I'm fortunate enough to be working with the Dissident Project, which is an initiative that takes people like myself that fled totalitarian regimes and puts them in front of student audiences here in the US, just to tell them about our life experiences and share some of the failed policies that we fled from, and hopefully raise a bit of awareness to keep that from happening anywhere else. I'm also a Young Voices contributor, and I'm really happy to be here today with you.
Gabby, one of the things I've always appreciated about conversations with you is you can speak from experience about things that, for instance, we'll take socialism. For a lot of young people in America, socialism, wow, that actually sounds kind of neat. Everything is fair and everybody's kind to each other. And I'm looking at an article you've written. Socialism sounds kind until you've lived it. You've lived it. Talk to me a little bit about what you cover in this article.
Absolutely. So socialism can indeed sound wonderful for native-born Americans, even second and third generation immigrants that haven't really had to live through some of the policies that are described by socialist candidates or socialist supporters today. However, nothing is as great as it sounds. And obviously that is the reason why we are here. Countries like mine, we actually had to live through the results of some of these policies that are not being rebranded under the democratic socialism or rebrand that is being pitched so successfully to young Americans. And we've just made it a passion about sharing the actual consequences of these policies that sound so wonderful, and that things that have been hidden behind the curtain of economic equality and things of that nature, which we all wish we could have, but unfortunately that's not how it really works. We've had to live through all of those.
You make the point in your article, for instance, Zoran Mandami in New York City. He's making big waves and very well could become the next mayor of New York City, but he's making the very same promises, socialist promises that others have made, and the people most likely to vote for him likely have never had a chance to live under the conditions that he's promising.
Exactly. The fact that candidates like Zoran Mamdani are so popular, it really speaks volumes as to how young Americans are looking for ways to improve their cities and their country, which makes sense. And one can see that. One can see how if you didn't grow up actually feeling the consequences, the real consequences of these policies, you may be drawn to that. And that's why I make it a point in my article to state the importance that immigrants have and immigrant voices and the key role that we need to play in order to speak with it to American audiences about the real effects of these policies. Mamdani and candidates like him, again, hiding behind this beautiful brand new rebrand of democratic socialism. They promise all of the things everyone wishes they could have. They talk about rent control and they talk about government-run grocery stores and about heavily subsidized public transport. And we actually had to live through the results of those policies. And we know how raising minimum wage really meant job losses, massive job losses. And we know how rent control ended up meaning the housing being a pretty impossible. If you think it's expensive now, it became absolutely impossible for anyone to get housing, and developers moved away to different cities, and employers just stopped looking and sourcing people from these areas. And so we have actually had to live through that. And that's why we're so passionate about sharing with American audiences that yes, grocery prices are going up. No, this is not the solution. We actually did not start encountering empty grocery stores and completely unaffordable prices until these government-run grocery stores came to be. So there's a difference between what's being pitched to you and how that sounds and the reality that so many of us have had to actually live through.
And something you point out in your article, too, that just struck home to me is for many Americans, especially those who have been here for a while or maybe second and third generation immigrants, they don't quite have the connection to what it cost to become free. To the freedom that they inherited is much easier to take for granted. these are the ones I think you point out are more likely to hear it and think, oh, economic justice. Well, that sounds so compassionate, but they've never lived under it. And I guess this is why they need to listen to individuals such as yourself.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why I think immigrants, so not firstborn, immigrants that have not been born in the United States, so nationalized immigrants are going to play such a key role into sharing that message with the world, with Native Americans and with second and third generation Americans, because we are not just supposed to, and this is true for immigrants everywhere around the world, we are not just meant to move somewhere and make a living and make something of ourselves and contribute to our community in whatever way we can. Yes, we should do all those things, but in addition to that, we are playing a key role and we are responsible for preserving and fighting to preserve those freedoms that brought us here in the first place and challenging those policies when we see them, those policies that we recognize so well that brought us here in the first place. Yeah.
I love in your article where you talk to a Venezuelan who watched supermarkets empty while officials on TV, blamed capitalism, or a Nicaraguan who got free education that came with forced political indoctrination, or a Cuban who lost their home and their voice and livelihood all at once. You have a perspective of what it's like to see those things. And I know I can speak for myself. The only time in my life I ever saw empty grocery store shelves was when I was a young man and there was a general truckers' strike and the stores were not being resupplied on a timely basis. And it was very chilling. But I think most people probably have never seen that unless they've lived under socialist conditions.
Absolutely. Every time the government steps in to try and control and make something better, it almost always ends up being worse for everyone involved, and the opposite ends up happening. And if that wasn't the case, immigration waves would follow the opposite pattern, but that's just the reality. That's why I think it's so important, especially now today, that polls show that immigrants and that have been naturalized as American citizens are less likely to be tied to partisan politics. We are less likely to feel that pressure because we were not born here from either side, because there's a lot of noise around the current immigration debate. We have a responsibility to overcome all that noise and just push that aside and try and stay focused on truth, grounded in truth, and focused on just combating the same policies that brought us here in the first place, regardless of which side of the political spectrum they may be coming from.
How do we help people, and I mean immigrants as well as longtime citizens, understand their duty to preserve freedom? What does it take to inspire people to step up and take that seriously?
We have to continue sharing our personal experiences. We have to continue amplifying immigrant voices and putting immigrants in front of school audiences and civic institutions, not to push a certain narrative, but to at least offer that perspective, that different perspective that an American may not have heard, or that a second, third immigrant may not have heard. And so that's what we have to continue doing. We have to be fearless in speaking up, regardless of how much pressure we are receiving, because we are from both sides. As you as an immigrant have this pressure all the time, because if not, you're going to be seen as ungrateful, or and this is happening on both sides. But we have to be able to rise above that and remember what brought us here in the first place and what we want to keep from happening here again.
It makes me think of, I think it was a meme that I saw earlier this week, something to the effect of, do not mistake an experience that someone has actually lived through for a mere opinion. And I thought, oh, that kind of fits.
Exactly. Yeah, the results of socialist policies around the world speak for themselves. It's hard to see. And again, we just have to go back to the numbers and reality and truth and what's actually happened versus what we hope is going to happen.
Again, we are speaking with Gabriela Blanco. Gabby, how can people find you on social media?
You can find me under _ Gabby Blanco. That's on Instagram, X, TikTok, and most importantly, you can find the Dissident Project under the same name in all platforms. And please follow them. Speak to a school, a teacher will happily come to your school free of charge. We'll have a conversation, happy to answer questions, and hopefully help students have a different perspective on a few things.